Snow lashed across the winding mountain road, a blinding curtain of white. Daniel Harper gripped the steering wheel, leaning forward, eyes squinting through the storm. Then he saw it, a dark lump in the ditch ahead. At first, he thought it was a log, but something in his gut told him to slow down. He stopped, opened the door, and the wind slammed into him like a wall. Trudging through drifts, he reached the shape. A man, motionless, face pale, lips blue. No movement, no sound, but the howl of the wind. Daniel knew instantly. If he left to get help, the man wouldn't last. He took a deep breath, bracing for a decision that could cost him his own life. This road cut through miles of wilderness. No cell service, no towns for hours. Daniel had driven it countless times, but tonight was different. The blizzard had arrived earlier than predicted, burying everything in snow. His truck's heater was barely keeping up. Out here, temperatures dropped so fast that frostbite could set in within minutes. Daniel crouched, pressing 2 fingers to the man's neck. Their faint, slow pulse. His chest rose in shallow breaths. Daniel shook him gently. "Hey, can you hear me?" No response. Snowflakes clung to the man's eyelashes. Ice crusted in his hair. He was slipping away. Daniel looked up and down the road. Not a single pair of headlights. If he drove to find help, the man would freeze to death before he got back. His soaked clothing told Daniel he'd been lying here for some time. He remembered a survival program he'd once seen. When they stop shivering, they're in danger. This man wasn't shivering. Panic pricked at Daniel's chest, but he forced himself to think clearly. Options? None worth taking, except one. He exhaled sharply, muttering under his breath, "All right, buddy. We're getting you out of here." He bent down, ready to lift. Daniel hooked his arms under the man's shoulders, pulling him upright. The stranger's legs were stiff, barely bending, like frozen wood. Daniel stripped off his own heavy coat, wrapping it tightly around the man's torso. The cold sliced into him instantly, but he ignored it. He glanced back at his truck, heater still running, warm and safe, and then turned away. No, he thought, I can't risk leaving him here. Adjusting his stance, Daniel heaved him up, snow crunching under his boots. The man's head lolled against his shoulder. Somewhere deep down, Daniel hoped his own strength would last. The man was heavier than expected, his body limp. Daniel shifted into a fireman's carry, the man's arm dangling across his chest. The wind roared, each gust pushing against him like an invisible wall. 3 miles, Daniel told himself. Just 3 miles to the nearest house. But in this storm, it could take hours. He could feel the man's shallow breaths against his back, proof he was still alive. "Hang on," Daniel grunted. "Don't quit on me." The snow swallowed his boots with each step, pulling him down. The road ahead looked endless, but turning back wasn't an option. Every step was deliberate, measured. The snow came nearly to Daniel's knees, forcing him to lift his legs high, his thighs burning. His shoulders ached under the man's weight. His lungs heaved against the freezing air, and every breath felt like inhaling glass. Part of him wondered why he was risking so much for a stranger. But the answer was simple, because no one else was here to do it. That thought, that truth, kept his feet moving. The storm roared in his ears, the darkness pressing in. He focused on the rhythm. Lift, step, breathe. Daniel's body screamed in protest, but he found a pace he could sustain. The wind stung his exposed face, but he ignored the pain. His boots slid on hidden ice beneath the snow, forcing him to steady himself with every step. He glanced down at the man's face. His lips were still blue, but his eyes fluttered faintly, a sign he was conscious enough to cling to life. "Good," Daniel said between breaths. "Stay with me?" The first mile felt like an eternity. The dark silhouette of pine trees on either side gave the illusion of progress, but the road stretched endlessly ahead. A faint murmur reached Daniel's ears. At first, he thought it was the wind, but then he realized the man was speaking. Cabin, light, help. The words were broken, barely audible. Daniel leaned his head slightly. Where's the cabin? No answer, just another groan. Still, it gave him a spark of hope. Maybe there was a cabin closer than the house he'd been aiming for. He scanned the whiteness ahead, but saw nothing yet. All right, Daniel said aloud, we're going to find it. He adjusted his grip, pushing forward into the swirling snow. Adrenaline surged through Daniel's veins. The exhaustion in his muscles dulled, replaced by a fierce determination. The snow was still punishing, but he was moving faster now, driven by the possibility of shelter nearby. The wind howled like a living thing, but Daniel shut it out, focusing instead on the sound of his boots crunching and the man's faint breathing. He remembered reading that keeping a hypothermia victim awake and engaged could mean the difference between life and death. Hey, Daniel said, you got a name? Silence. But Daniel kept talking anyway, if only to keep his own mind sharp. A sudden blast of wind knocked Daniel sideways, nearly sending them both into the snow. He tightened his grip, muscles trembling. His breath came in ragged gasps, and for the first time, a wave of doubt hit him hard. I can't do this, a voice in his head whispered. His legs burned, his shoulders throbbed, and the snow seemed endless. But another voice answered, louder, yes, you can. One more step. He planted his boots firmly, forcing himself forward. The man on his back didn't stir, but the faint weight of his life kept Daniel's resolve alive. As he trudged on, a memory surfaced, his father's voice. If you can help, you help. No excuses. He remembered watching his father, years ago, stop their car to help a stranded driver in a snowstorm. He'd asked why they didn't just call someone, and his father had smiled. Because we're here now. And sometimes now is all a person has. That memory burned in his mind like a warm ember. Daniel gritted his teeth and pushed harder, carrying not just a man, but a lesson that had lived in him since childhood. Daniel's boots were soaked, his toes numb. The cold bit into his fingers, even through his gloves. The man's breathing was slow, almost too slow. Panic bubbled in Daniel's chest. Stay with me, he muttered over and over. The storm eased for a brief moment, and in the distance, he thought he saw a faint glow. He blinked against the snow. Was it a light, or just his imagination? Either way, he moved toward it, every muscle screaming but refusing to stop. The glow grew brighter, no longer a trick of the storm. It flickered warm, steady. A porch light? A lantern? Daniel's heart pounded. Almost there, he said, though the man couldn't hear him. The snow seemed to deepen, as if testing his resolve one last time. His thighs felt like lead, his lungs burned, but the thought of warmth, for both of them, pulled him forward. A wave of dizziness washed over him. His knees buckled, and for a terrifying moment, he nearly dropped the man. He fell to one knee, panting, snow piling on their shoulders. Not now, he growled at himself. He shifted the man's weight, dug his boots in, and rose again. The light ahead was close enough now to make out the outline of a cabin. Salvation was just ahead. Wind roared one last time, as if unwilling to let them go. Daniel lowered his head and pushed forward, each step an act of sheer will. His vision narrowed to the door of the cabin, glowing with warm light. His chest felt like it might burst from the effort. Then, a shadow moved inside. Someone was home. He staggered toward the porch, shouting for help. The door burst open, and an older couple rushed out, their eyes wide at the sight. My God, the woman cried. They each grabbed an arm, helping Daniel lower the man to the porch. The heat spilling from the open door felt like heaven. Inside, they laid the man by the fire, wrapping him in blankets. Daniel collapsed into a chair, his hands red and raw from the cold. For the first time, he allowed himself to believe they might both live through this. The couple moved quickly, removing the man's wet clothes, replacing them with dry ones, giving him warm sips of broth. They called the ranger station on their old radio, explaining the urgency. The man's breathing steadied slightly. Daniel sat silently, his body aching but his mind alert, watching every small sign of improvement. When the man finally opened his eyes, they were glazed but alive. His name was Thomas Reeves. His snowmobile had broken down hours earlier, and he tried to walk for help before collapsing. He'd been lying in the snow for nearly an hour before Daniel found him. "I thought?" Thomas's voice cracked. "I thought that was it." Daniel simply nodded. "Not tonight." Tears welled in Thomas's eyes as he gripped Daniel's frostbitten hand. "You didn't just save my life. You gave me a second chance to see my family." Daniel, exhausted, only said, "You'd have done the same." But deep down, he knew not everyone would. The sound of an approaching snowcat broke the quiet. Rangers arrived, checking both men. Thomas had severe hypothermia, but would survive. Daniel had frostbite on his fingers and toes. They bundled them into the snowcat, the cabin's warm glow fading into the distance as they began the slow ride back to town. News of the rescue spread quickly. The local paper ran the headline, "Man carries stranger for 3 miles in blizzard to save his life." Daniel received recognition from the community, though he brushed it off. Anyone would have done it, he insisted. But quietly, he knew that night had changed him. Daniel began volunteering with the local search and rescue team. Each mission reminded him of that night, the weight of another human being on his shoulders, the fight against the storm, the stubborn refusal to quit. He learned that heroism wasn't about glory. It was about showing up when someone needed you most. Months later, Thomas invited Daniel to his home for dinner. Their families met, sharing stories over a warm meal. Laughter filled the room. A friendship had been forged in the snow, one neither would forget. Acts of humaneness rarely happen in front of cameras. They happen on lonely roads, in quiet moments, when no one else is watching. And they change lives, sometimes two at once. Daniel's voice closes the story. We're all each other's lifelines, sometimes literally. The screen fades to a snowy road under a clear sky. Text appears. If you believe in telling stories that prove the goodness in people, share this video. Gentle music plays as the credits roll.